The underground parking garage of the Wilshire Grand Hotel sits in shadow, even at 3 in the afternoon. Concrete pillars rise like tombstones. The smell of oil and wet metal hangs in the recycled air. And above ground, the sky has turned the color of a bruise. Lightning splits the darkness at 3:11 p.m. on a Thursday in July. Emma Harrington, 7 years old, runs ahead of her nanny through the garage toward the elevator bank. Her pink sneakers splash through puddles that have begun collecting near the entrance ramp. The storm is arriving. Everyone can feel it. Everyone can hear the thunder rolling across the city like a warning that no one heeds. Then the child stops running. She stops, and her hand reaches out toward the concrete pillar beside her, and her small body goes rigid like someone has cut her strings. Her mouth opens. No sound comes out. Her lips begin turning from pink to blue to a color that should never exist on the face of a child. Mia Voss is 12 feet away, pushing a shopping cart filled with cleaning supplies and folded towels. She is 29 years old, but her eyes carry the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her hair is pulled back with a rubber band that has lost its elasticity. Her Target t-shirt is stained with coffee from the morning shift she worked before arriving at the Harrington mansion. Her jeans have holes in both knees, not fashionable holes but real holes worn through from kneeling on tile floors and bathtubs while scrubbing other people's filth away for $7 an hour. She sees the child collapse. Time does not slow down. Time does not expand. What happens is worse than that. What happens is that time becomes irrelevant, and the only thing that exists is the small body on the concrete and the blueness spreading across the small face. Mia drops the cart. The sound of metal crashing echoes through the garage like a gunshot in the silence. She runs. Her calloused hands, cracked from 14-hour days of scrubbing and washing and working, drop to the concrete beside Emma's trembling body. The rain is beginning now. Fat drops that hit the concrete and explode into smaller pieces. The smell of rain on hot asphalt fills the garage. Emma. Emma. Baby, stay with me. Mia's voice is trembling like a candle in the wind, but her hands are steady. She tilts the child's head back. Clears the small mouth. Pinches the small nose closed. And she breathes into the child's lungs with every ounce of desperation she possesses, like she is trying to force her own life into a body that is slipping away. 1 compression. 2 compressions. 3. She counts them out loud because sound is the only thing keeping her anchored to this moment and not falling into the darkness that threatens to swallow everything. 4 compressions. 5. The rain is coming harder now. It floods through the open entrance ramp where the storm outside is unleashing its full fury. Lightning illuminates the garage in stuttering bursts. Each flash freezes the moment in terrible clarity. The small chest. The stained t-shirt. The hands pressing down with a force that should break a child but might instead save her. 10 compressions. Then a breath. Then 10 more compressions. Behind her, frozen beside an Italian leather handbag worth more than 3 months of Mia's rent, stands Margaret Harrington. Emma's biological mother. The general manager of the Wilshire Grand Hotel. She is 52 years old, her face pulled tight by surgery that costs more than a down payment on a house. Her suit is custom-tailored, for $1,000 in navy silk that catches the fluorescent light. Her mouth opens and closes. Opens and closes. Like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that does not save it. She does not move. She does not call for help. She does not drop to her knees beside her daughter. She stands 3 feet away with her mouth opening and closing and her eyes wide and utterly useless, as if her position in the world and her money and her title have suddenly become invisible and left her naked in front of the only moment that has ever truly mattered. 20 compressions now. Another breath forced into the small lungs. The rain sounds like applause against the concrete. Faster and faster. Harder and harder. The storm is directly overhead now. The thunder is not distant. It is right here in the garage with them, shaking the walls, shaking the earth, shaking the certainty from every person watching. 30 compressions. 40. 50. Mia's hands are bleeding. The concrete has split the skin across her knuckles where she has been pressing down again and again and again, and she does not feel the pain because pain is not real in this moment. Nothing is real except the small chest and the small lungs and the small child who cannot die because Mia Voss will not allow it. 60 compressions. A breath. And the child gasps. Emma gasps like someone pulling herself up from drowning. Her small body convulses. Her eyes snap open. She coughs, and the sound is the most beautiful sound Mia has ever heard in her entire life, like the first word of a prayer that has finally been answered. The child is breathing. The child is alive. And in that moment, a black sedan breaks through the rain and pulls into the underground garage with the kind of precision that comes from a driver who has made this same movement 1,000 times before. Controlled. Deliberate. Unhurried. The back door opens. The man who steps out into the rain is 6'2" tall. His shoulders are broad enough that the door frame seems to shrink around him. His suit is charcoal gray, tailored so perfectly that the fabric moves like water across his muscular frame. His white shirt is unbuttoned at the collar, showing the edge of a tattoo in Korean characters that no one dares to ask him about. His hair is dark, almost black, with silver threading through at the temples like frost on pavement. His eyes are the color of a storm at midnight, and they are fixed on the small child coughing on the concrete floor of the parking garage. This is Aleandro Calabrese. For 15 years, his name has been whispered in rooms where men decide the fate of other men. For 15 years, his black SUVs have rolled through neighborhoods in Koreatown and Beverly Hills and East Los Angeles, and people have stepped aside and looked away because looking at Aleandro Calabrese directly is an act of dangerous disrespect. His hands have signed the paperwork that sends men to federal prison. His words have been law in the underground poker rooms where fortunes change hands like playing cards. His voice is deep and solid like an oath, and when he speaks, the world listens. He has never, in the presence of his men, shown a single moment of weakness. But now he is staring at his daughter on the concrete floor of an underground parking garage, and his hands are trembling. Vinny and Enzo stand behind him, two men in charcoal suits with the same kind of careful, lethal patience that Aleandro carries like a second skin. They have been with him for 12 years. They have never seen his hands shake. They have never seen his jaw clench the way it is clenching now. They have never seen the color drain from his face like someone has opened a wound and all his blood is pouring into the darkness. Aleandro moves toward the child without a word. Mia looks up. For a moment, time compresses. The rain. The thunder. The sound of Emma breathing. The face of a man who is looking at his daughter with an expression so raw, so devastated, so completely stripped of every defense, that Mia understands in a single second that this man is not a stranger who happened to arrive at the right moment. This man is a father who just watched his daughter die and then watched a nobody nanny in a stained t-shirt bring her back to life. His voice comes out like barely a whisper, but it fills the entire garage. Is she breathing? Mia nods. She is breathing. Aleandro drops to his knees beside the child. His tailored suit soaks through on the wet concrete. His hands, which have signed death sentences and ordered violence without hesitation, reach out and touch his daughter's face like she is made of something more fragile than glass. He looks at Emma. Then he looks at Mia. And in his eyes, something shifts. Something changes. Something acknowledges a debt that can never be repaid. Call the ambulance, he says to Vinny, and his voice is steady again, but something underneath it has broken and will never be quite the same. The rain pounds down harder. Margaret Harrington stands frozen, her mouth still opening and closing, her $4,000 suit soaking through, a usefulness revealed as illusion in the presence of a moment that required actual human courage. But Mia is already standing, her bleeding hands hanging at her sides, watching the most powerful man in Los Angeles cradle his daughter against his chest while the storm rages overhead. She does not know who this man is. She does not know that her action in the next few hours will set off a chain of events that will destroy 2 lives and save her own from the darkness that has held her captive for 8 years. She does not know that the debt has already been calculated, and she has become the one person in this city that Aleandro Calabrese would burn the world to protect. The thunder cracks again, directly overhead. And the story that begins here, in this moment, with rain and desperation and a child breathing again, has only just begun to unfold. Before we continue, drop a like if this story touches your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you do not miss what happens next. We are only at the beginning, and everything is about to change. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how a woman with only $5 in her pocket and 8 years of scars across her back became the one person that the most dangerous man in Los Angeles could never refuse. The alarm on Mia's phone screams at 5:16 in the morning, and she silences it before it wakes anyone in the mansion. Her eyes open in the darkness of the converted closet off the Harrington kitchen in Bel Air, a space 6 feet by 8 feet with no window, just concrete walls and the smell of cleaning supplies stacked in the corner. Her mattress sits on the floor next to industrial-sized bottles of bleach and furniture polish. This is her bedroom. This has been her bedroom for 4 years. She sits up slowly, her bare back meeting the cold air, and in the mirror mounted on the inside of the closet door, she sees what she always sees. The scars. Welts running in every direction like a map of hell, 8 years of Douglas Hale's rage carved into her skin in patterns she has stopped trying to understand. She traces one with her fingertip, remembers the sound his belt made before it landed. She never told anyone. Not Margaret. Not the other house staff. Not Emma. Nobody knows that underneath the modest button-up shirts and the aprons, she is a geography of violence. She pulls on her work uniform, cotton so worn it is nearly transparent, and steps into the hallway. The mansion is still sleeping. 5-bedroom, 3-bath, worth more than she will make in 3 lifetimes, and she moves through it like a ghost, like a shadow that refused to leave. The kitchen is her territory. Stainless steel counters, marble backsplash, a refrigerator the size of a closet. She begins the morning ritual without thinking. Fresh squeezed orange juice, the kind Margaret demands, squeezed by hand because the machines are never quite good enough. Gluten-free pancakes made from scratch. Egg white separated from yolks with precision. Every movement is trained, efficient, invisible. At 6:15, Margaret Harrington sweeps through the kitchen in silk pajamas the color of cream, her blonde hair still wet from her morning shower. She is 47 years old but looks 35 because she has money and discipline and no mercy. She does not acknowledge Mia's existence. She simply sets her dirty espresso cup on the counter, walks away, and leaves it there like an offering to the help. Mia cleans it without being asked. The guest bathroom needs attention, Margaret calls from the hallway. I saw a water spot on the mirror yesterday. It is still there. Unacceptable. Yes, Mrs. Harrington, Mia says quietly, her voice barely a whisper. And this afternoon, Emma needs new shoes. Her school shoes are looking worn. Take her to the mall. Use the credit card. Do not embarrass me by shopping at discount stores. The child will wear quality, or I will find someone else to manage her. Mia nods. She does not say that Emma's shoes are fine, that Emma wore them yesterday, that the credit card has a $200 weekly limit that Margaret monitors obsessively. She simply nods and turns back to the pancakes. Emma appears at 7:15 in her school uniform, her blonde hair braided by someone expensive, her face carrying none of her mother's coldness. She is 7 years old and still innocent, still capable of loving unconditionally. She climbs onto the bar stool and watches Mia plate the pancakes. Did you sleep okay? Mia asks, sliding the plate in front of her. I had a dream about the ocean, Emma says, drowning the pancakes in syrup. We were at the beach, and you were there, and Mommy was there, and we were all happy. And we had ice cream. So much ice cream. Mia's throat tightens. She touches the top of Emma's head, lets her fingers rest in the soft blonde hair for just a moment longer than necessary. That sounds perfect, she says. Mia? Emma looks up at her, syrup on her chin. Yes, sweetheart. I love you more than Mommy. Is that bad? The question lands like a blade through her heart. Mia sits down on the floor next to Emma's bar stool so they are eye level, and she looks at this child who is not hers, who she will never be allowed to claim, who she loves with a desperation that sometimes makes it hard to breathe. "It is not bad," she whispers. "I love you too. So much." Emma hugs her, sticky fingers and all, and for exactly 3 seconds, Mia lets herself pretend that this is her life. That this beautiful, uncomplicated love is real. That she gets to keep her. Then Margaret calls out from upstairs, and the moment shatters like glass. At 8:19 in the morning, they are in the car driving toward Crossroads School, the most exclusive private institution in Los Angeles, where Emma's tuition costs more than Mia makes in a year. Emma holds her hand the entire drive, and Mia keeps her eyes on the road because if she looks at this child one more time, she will break completely. When they pull up to the entrance, Emma leans over and whispers something that Mia will remember for the rest of her life. If anything bad ever happens, Emma says, "I want you to know that you are my favorite person in the world." Nothing bad is going to happen, Mia lies. By 3:36 in the afternoon, Mia is sitting on the edge of her mattress in the converted closet, her hand shaking, her phone buzzing in her pocket. Another message from Douglas. Another demand. Another threat. The messages are always the same. A number followed by a deadline. $35,000 in 3 days, and if she does not pay him, he will tell Margaret about the shoplifting charge from when Mia was homeless and desperate. He will tell Margaret that Mia is a criminal. He will get her fired. He will take Emma away from her just like he took Lily. The phone shows her bank account. $112. Minus the $50 she promised to send her sister. Plus the $5 bills in her pocket, which is what is left after sending Douglas $200 from her salary last week. $5. All the money she has in the world. She reaches under the mattress and pulls out a small plastic bag. Inside is a pair of tiny pink sneakers, baby size 4, so small they fit in her palm. The shoes are almost 4 years old. The sole is worn through on one heel. The fabric is stained and faded. But they are the only thing she has from Lily, the daughter she gave birth to, the daughter Child Services took when she was 19 years old and broken and Douglas had just fractured 3 of her ribs. She holds the shoes against her chest. At 2:48 in the afternoon, in a penthouse office on the 63rd floor of a building in downtown Los Angeles, Aleandro Calabrese sits behind a mahogany desk with his lieutenants arrayed around him. He is tall, broad-shouldered, expensive. His suit costs more than most people's monthly rent. A scar runs from his left eye to his cheekbone, white against his olive skin. He is 34 years old and has been running the Los Angeles underworld since he was 22, and he has never once let emotion complicate a business decision. Until his daughter collapsed at her mother's home 3 days ago. The doctors say it is a rare heart condition, something about her electrical system misfiring, something that could have killed her. They say she is lucky to be alive. Lucky. The rain is coming tonight, Enzo says from the chair across from him. Big storm moving in from the coast. Visibility will be bad. Aleandro does not respond. He is thinking about his daughter's chest moving with breath, his daughter's heart continuing to beat. He is thinking about luck. About the things that save us. About the things that should never be called luck because they are miracles. We should postpone the collection runs, vineyards. The families will understand. Better to move when the weather clears. But Aleandro is not listening. He is looking out at the city below, at the cars moving through the streets, at all the small lives happening simultaneously, all the people who are walking through their days without knowing that one moment, 1 second, one choice can change everything. He does not know yet that his story is about to intersect with someone else's. He does not know that in exactly 4 hours and 16 minutes, he will be driving through a thunderstorm and find a woman performing CPR on a child in an underground parking garage. He does not know that her action in that moment will shatter something inside him that he thought was unbreakable. But the rain is coming. And sometimes the universe sends its messages in thunder. The underground parking garage smelled like oil and death and fluorescence. 3:47 in the afternoon, though the concrete tomb had no concept of time. Mia held Emma's small hand as they descended the ramp, the summer heat they'd left behind replaced by something cold and chemical. Emma was 7 years old and had been saying she didn't feel good since they left the Wilshire Grand's lobby 20 minutes earlier. Margaret had texted at 3:45 p.m. with the words every live-in nanny dreads, emergency. Bring Emma now. No explanation. No apology. Just a command wrapped in the assumption that Mia's time, Mia's body, Mia's life belonged to her completely. They walked past rows of parked sedans, their footsteps echoing off concrete. A siren wailed somewhere above them. Emma's breathing had changed, shallow, rapid, the sound of a small animal trapped in a cage too small. Mia knelt down. Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? But Emma didn't answer. She made a sound like a gasp, like her throat was closing. Her small lips turned blue. Not pale. Blue. The color of drowning. The child collapsed forward. Mia caught her, lowered her gently to the ground, and in that moment every survival instinct inside her shattered into one crystalline purpose. 7 years ago, she had lost a baby. A daughter named Lily, stillborn at 6 months, and Mia had held her small body for exactly 4 minutes before the nurses took her away. She had promised herself she would never be helpless again. Never stand frozen while someone she loved died. Mia's hands moved. She tilted Emma's head back, opened her mouth, began CPR. 1 compression, 2, 3. The small chest barely moved under her palms. Rain began to drum against the concrete ceiling. Somewhere above them, a storm was arriving. 1, 2, 3. Mia was counting. She was praying. She was screaming silently into a universe that had already taken so much. A car engine. Footsteps. Margaret's voice from somewhere distant, thin and useless. Oh my God. Oh my God. Margaret stood 10 feet away, her phone in her hand, her mouth open like a drawer left pulling. Margaret was the kind of woman who directed traffic at disasters. She did not enter them. She observed them, lamented them, documented them. She did not save them. A black Mercedes sedan pulled into the garage. The engine cut off. A door opened with the softness of expensive engineering. A man stepped out and the world compressed around him like space bending toward gravity. He was 6'2" and broad across the shoulders, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than Mia's rent. His eyes were black glass, the kind that reflect nothing and absorb everything. A thin scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, white against olive skin. Aleandro Calabrese had come to the Wilshire Grand to collect a debt. What he found instead was a woman with calloused hands breathing life into a child's mouth. He moved. Not rushed. Deliberate. Each step controlled, economical, the way a predator approaches something it intends to own. Behind him, 2 men in identical dark suits, Vinny and Enzo, froze in the posture of people witnessing something they had no permission to witness. Mia compressed Emma's chest again. Once more. Again. The child was so small. Her sternum so fragile it felt like she might break her in the attempt to save her. But breaking her with resuscitation was infinitely better than letting her die intact. 1 more compression. And Emma gasped. Not a gentle awakening. A violent inhalation, like her body was clawing its way back from somewhere dark. She coughed, her small frame convulsing, liquid spilling from her mouth. Her eyes opened. Alive. The child was alive. Thunder cracked directly above them, so loud it seemed to split the concrete itself. Rain began to pour through the open garage entrance like the sky was breaking. Aleandro dropped to one knee beside them. His suit was already soaked. He didn't notice. He pulled Emma into his arms, cradled her small body against his chest, and over the child's shaking head, he locked eyes with Mia Voss. This man who had built an empire on nothing but will and violence. This man who had killed 7 people with his own hands and ordered the deaths of 32 more. This man looked at Mia and his entire face reorganized itself into something that was almost human. He mouthed the word, "Thank you." Paramedics arrived. The emergency became official, documented, handed over to people with credentials. Margaret finally moved, finally touched Emma, but the child turned away from her and clung to Aleandro like he was a life raft and she was drowning. The irony was so sharp it could cut. 30 minutes later, the lobby of the Wilshire Grand glowed with the soft light of controlled crisis management. Emergency vehicles outside, uniformed paramedics checking Emma's vitals on a leather sofa, guests walking past with their phones out. Margaret pulled Mia into the kitchen. Her nails dug into Mia's upper arm. "You embarrass me," Margaret hissed. Her face was close enough that Mia could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive, something that smelled like dominion. "Making a scene in the public space. You left your post. Your position depends on discretion." Mia's voice came out barely audible. Emma collapsed. "I had to. You will work until midnight tonight to make up for the time you've lost." Margaret released her arm. A red imprint bloomed where the nails had been. "And we will discuss your wages tomorrow." Mia nodded. She had learned that nodding was often safer than speaking. Agreement required no defense. It closed conversations. It made pain more efficient. Across the lobby, Aleandro Calabrese watched this exchange with the intensity of a man reading a language he suddenly understood. Vinny stood beside him, diminutive and forgettable, the way all of Aleandro's lieutenants were designed to be. Vinny leaned closer. "Boss, she's nobody. Just the nanny. The Harrington woman hires and fires them monthly." Aleandro's jaw tightened. The muscle beneath his scar worked once, then stilled. He moved across the lobby with the casual inevitability of a man who had never been told no. Margaret's face transformed, her cruelty receding behind a mask of charm the moment she saw him approaching. "Mr. Calabrese." What a surprise. She extended her hand. "I hope Emma will be all right." Aleandro did not take her hand. "The woman who saved the child. What's her arrangement with you?" Margaret's smile flickered. "Mia? She's live-in help. Room and board plus $300 a week. That's below minimum wage for the hours you work her." Aleandro's voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Volume was unnecessary when every word carried the weight of imminent consequence. "How many hours per day?" Margaret's voice became smaller. 14. Sometimes 16 when we have guests." Aleandro looked at Mia directly. She felt it like a spotlight finding her in darkness. "Is this acceptable to you?" Mia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together. "Yes, sir. I'm grateful for the position." But Aleandro was looking at her hands, at how they trembled like small wounded birds. He was noticing the calluses on her palms, the nail beds bruised from scrubbing, the thin white line of scar tissue around her left wrist. He was noticing everything because he had been taught by his father's belt that the details of other people's suffering were the only details that mattered. "You saved my daughter," he said quietly. Only Mia could hear him. "That makes you worth more than everyone in this lobby combined." Then he turned and walked away, Margaret following like a dog desperate for scraps of attention. 1 week passed. 7 days of Mia working 14-hour shifts, sleeping in the converted closet that Margaret called a room, counting the $5 in her pocket and calculating how she could possibly stretch it through to Friday. She kept Emma close during that week, watching the child's small chest rise and fall with breath, terrified that the fragile machinery might fail again. At 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, Mia was scrubbing the kitchen floor on her hands and knees when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. The text read, "The child's first shoes. You kept them. Why?" Her blood converted to ice. She looked around the empty kitchen, then back at the phone. She typed, "Who is this?" The response came immediately, "Someone who understands." She set the phone down and her hands resumed scrubbing. But her mind was somewhere else, in the shelter where she had spent 2 years, in the room with the baby who wasn't moving, in the drawer where she kept a pair of tiny red sneakers that her daughter Lily had never worn. The shoes were all that was left. The shoes were everything. 2 weeks after the garage, at 6 in the morning, Douglas Hale appeared at the service entrance. Mia's entire body went rigid the moment she saw him through the door's small window. She almost didn't open it. Almost let him stand outside forever. But forever never lasts. Douglas was 42, thick-necked, wearing a stained button-down shirt that hadn't been washed in weeks. He smelled like cigarettes and resentment and the particular rancidity of a man who believed the world owed him something it had never promised. 8 years ago, he had been Mia's boyfriend. 8 years ago, he had beaten her in ways that left marks only she could see. 8 years ago, he had almost killed her. Got my money. His voice was gravel and violence. I sent you $200 last week. Mia's voice was smaller than air. That's all I could. He grabbed her wrist and twisted. The old breakpoint, the place where the bone had fractured before, where the pain was still living and breathing. I said 35,000 in 3 days. That was for weeks ago. Now it's 50,000 or I burn your world down. I don't have it. Tears were running down her face. She had learned not to cry, learned it on his fists, but fear made her body disobey her mind. Douglas, please. I can't. I'm working, I'm saving, I'm. 2 more weeks. He released her wrist. Or I tell your rich boss about your past. About the drugs. About how you lost your kid. Every word was a lie, arranged like knives. She had never used drugs. She had lost a child because the universe was cruel and indifferent. But he would say anything. He was the kind of man who treated truth like an enemy. He shoved her and left. Mia slid down the doorframe, her wrist throbbing, her heart practicing its rhythm against her ribs. But what he didn't know was that Aleandro had 2 men watching the house. They had been there since the day Emma collapsed. They photographed everything. 3 weeks later, in an underground poker room in Koreatown, acrid smoke hung like a curtain. Green felt tables, stacks of cash arranged in precise columns, guards at every door who had learned to be invisible. Aleandro sat at the head table, cards in his hand, his expression revealing nothing. Vinny and Enzo flanked him. A lieutenant whose name no one used, he was simply called the accountant, stood nearby holding a folder. The nanny, the accountant said. Mia Voss. Her ex-boyfriend, Douglas Hale. 7 prior assault complaints. Extortion pattern dating back for years. He's been taking payments from her wages. The accountant slid a photograph across the table. Mia's wrist, purple with bruises in the distinct pattern of male fingers. Aleandro stared at it for 9 seconds. Exactly 9. Where is he? Aleandro's voice was polished stone. Koreatown. Apartment on Vermont. We have his location on surveillance. Vinny leaned close. Want us to handle it, boss? We can make it clean. Make it look like a drug deal gone wrong. Not yet. Aleandro set the photograph down. The candlelight caught the scar on his face. I want to understand why she stays. Enzo shifted his weight. In 15 years, boss, I've never seen you like this. Over a nanny. Aleandro's eyes were the color of obsidian. She saved Emma while everyone else froze. That makes her different from everyone else. Find out why she won't leave. Find out what she's protecting. Then we'll move. 1 month after the garage, Mia arrived at the Wilshire Grand Mansion to find Margaret in the foyer with 2 police officers. Her world inverted. Officers, this is Mia Voss. Margaret's voice dripped with triumphant disgust. I have reason to believe she's been stealing from me. Mia's voice evaporated. No. I would never. Margaret held up a diamond bracelet. Found this in her room. Worth $15,000. I want her arrested for theft. The officers moved toward Mia with the slow inevitability of law enforcement. Mia was thinking about the showbox under her mattress, about the tiny red shoes, about how she owned almost nothing in the world and would lose even that. Then Aleandro Calabrese walked through the front door like he owned it. He did. "Officers," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "There's been a misunderstanding." The two men froze. They recognized his face. Every cop in Los Angeles knew his face. Margaret's confidence wavered. "This doesn't concern you, Mr. Calabrese." "On the contrary." He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator deciding whether the prey was worth the hunt. "I had lunch with Police Chief Morrison yesterday. Mentioned I was concerned about labor law violations at the Wilshire Grand. Wage theft specifically. Employees paid below minimum wage, forced overtime, no days off. Margaret Harrington personally overseeing the entire operation." Margaret's face went the color of old newspaper. "The charges against Ms. Voss disappear now," Aleandro continued. "And the Harrington family's connection to my organization becomes a matter of public record. Which would devastate the family's social standing, I imagine." The officers left. Margaret stood in the foyer, trembling with fury and powerlessness, and said nothing. That night, an envelope was slipped under Mia's closet door. $50,000 in cash. A handwritten note, for the child's shoes. "And everything you've survived." Mia sat on her mattress holding more money than she had seen in her life, and she wept until her body forgot how to make sound. The rain came down like a curse that could not be erased. Mia stood on the marble balcony of the Harrington mansion, 30 feet above the stone patio, her white nanny uniform soaked through and clinging to her ribs like a second skin. The November wind tore through the garden below, scattering jasmine petals across the wet stone, and she could taste the ozone on her tongue, electric and final. She had $5 in her pocket. $5. The same amount she had 4 weeks ago, before the envelope, before the $50,000 in cash that Douglas had taken from her hands like he owned her breath itself. That morning, at 5:45 a.m., Douglas Hale had arrived at the service entrance of the mansion, his tobacco-stained teeth grinning like a shark that had caught the scent of blood in the water. He was a man of 48 with the face of something that had been left in the sun too long, weathered, predatory, wearing a grey hoodie that hung loose over his frame because 6 months in county jail had stripped 30 pounds from his bones. But the weight of what he was, the weight of 8 years of ownership over her body and her choices, had only grown heavier. Mia had opened the closet-sized room where she slept, the envelope of cash trembling in her hand. "Smart girl," Douglas had said, his voice rough like concrete being dragged across concrete. "Hand it over." "This is everything," Mia had whispered, her throat closing around the words. "After this, we're done. You leave me alone. You don't call. You don't come back." Douglas had taken the envelope, counted the bills with the ritualistic precision of someone who had stolen money his entire life, his thumb moving across each stack of hundreds. Then his smile had widened. He had set the envelope down on the shelf, on top of the showbox containing the child's first pair of red shoes that Mia had kept since the shelter where she and Lily had lived for years ago, and he had reached for Mia's throat. The wall had struck her spine first. Then his hand, crushing the delicate structure of her windpipe, his fingers finding the old scars beneath her collar, the ones that mapped his presence on her skin like geography she could not escape. His face had been inches from hers, his breath like cigarettes and desperation. "We're done when I say we're done," he had said, his voice dropping to something that only existed in her nightmares. "Next month, another 50,000. You're my retirement plan, baby. My little golden goose." He had traced one of the scars with his thumb, a gesture so casual it had felt like a threat carved into her future. "And if you tell anyone, if you think about running your mouth to your new boyfriend or the cops or whoever you think might save you, I'll make new ones. Worse ones. On your face this time, so everyone can see what happens to girls who don't know their place." He had released her. She had collapsed against the wall, gasping, her lungs pulling in air like drowning in reverse. By the time she could see clearly, he had picked up the envelope and was walking toward his car, a rusted Honda Civic that smelled like mold and regret. The cash was gone. All of it. Everything that had felt like possibility for 16 hours had evaporated. That night, 11 o'clock, the thunderstorm had rolled in from the ocean like something alive and angry. Mia had climbed the servant stairs to the second-floor balcony that overlooked the garden. The Harrington mansion was silent. Margaret was at a charity gala. Emma was asleep 3 rooms away. In the darkness, with only the rain witness to her thoughts, Mia had gripped the marble railing and understood that she was trapped in a machine that would never let her go. Douglas would never stop. There would always be another demand, another month, another $50,000 that she did not have and would never be able to earn because she was trapped in a mansion, living in a closet, earning minimum wage under the table. Margaret would never treat her as anything but a servant, a useful nothing, a body that existed only to care for other people's children. Lily, her daughter, her baby girl, was lost somewhere in the foster system, probably terrified, probably forgetting the sound of her mother's voice. And Emma, whom Mia loved with a fierceness that had surprised her, would eventually grow up and move away and forget that there had ever been a woman who loved her like a mother. She had $5 in her pocket. That was the sum total of her freedom. The railing was cold against her palms. The drop was 30 feet, maybe 35. The stone patio below was unforgiving. It would be quick. Easy. Final. A way to stop being a victim, a way to stop being a tool, a way to stop failing everyone she had ever loved. She had closed her eyes. The rain had soaked through her clothes, pooling at her collarbones, running down the length of her spine like cold fingers tracing the scars Douglas had made. She had thought about letting go. About how the fall would only last 3 seconds. About how peaceful it would be to stop fighting a war that could not be won. Her phone had buzzed in her pocket. She should have ignored it. Should have let Douglas's demands pass unanswered into the darkness. But something, maybe the memory of Emma's small hand gripping her thumb, maybe the ghost of Lily's laugh from 4 years ago, maybe the part of her that had not yet learned how to quit, had made her pull the phone from her soaked pocket. Unknown number. A text message, 3 words, don't. I'm coming. Mia had stared at the screen, her mind fracturing. Who had her number? How did anyone know she was standing here, thinking of ending it? The wind had shifted direction, and the rain had changed angles, stinging her face like tiny blades wrapped in ice. 30 seconds later, headlights had cut through the darkness like a sword through silk. A black Mercedes, expensive and moving fast, had pulled into the driveway. The car had not belonged to anyone in the Harrington family. She had known the moment the door opened who had arrived. Aleandro Calabrese had climbed the servant's stairs in a charcoal suit that had cost more than Mia's entire yearly salary, water streaming from his dark hair, his shoulders broad enough to fill the narrow stairwell. Behind him, like shadows given physical form, Vinny and Enzo had followed, their hands resting at their sides in the way that suggested they were prepared for violence. Mia had turned from the railing. Her hands had been shaking. Her face had been wet with rain and tears and the saltwater of her own desperation. How did you? She had started, but her voice had fractured like old glass. I've had men watching you since the day you saved Emma, Aleandro had said, his voice cutting through the storm with the precision of a blade. Every day. Every hour. I saw Douglas arrive this morning. I saw what he did to you. I saw the money disappear. I saw Margaret's cruelty. I saw everything, Mia. Then you know I'm broken, she had whispered. Used up. Finished. Why are you here? Why would you come for something so damaged? Aleandro had stepped closer to her, the rain soaking the expensive suit, and something in his face had shifted. In 15 years of working for him, Vinny would later tell Enzo that he had never seen his boss look at a woman the way he looked at Mia in that moment, like she was worth burning down the entire city to protect. Like she was worth breaking his own rules for. Because you saved my daughter when you had every reason to save yourself, Aleandro had said, his voice deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Because you kept fighting when anyone else would have quit. Because you're not nobody, Mia. You're the bravest person I have ever met. And nobody touches what is mine. I can't keep taking your money, Mia had said, her hands rising in a gesture of refusal. I can't, you don't understand. He'll never stop. This cycle, it never ends. I'm broken. Why would you want to help me? I'm nothing. You're everything, Aleandro had said, and the words had hung in the rain between them like a prayer. Let me handle Douglas. And Margaret. My way. What does that mean? Mia had asked, though she had already known. She had seen his car arrive at the mansion. She had felt the weight of his protection, invisible but absolute, for weeks. Aleandro's smile had been cold enough to freeze the rain mid-fall. Justice. 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 days later. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does not move quickly without serious motivation, and serious motivation had arrived in the form of a 40-page document detailing 8 years of extortion, wire fraud, interstate racketeering, and aggravated assault. 12 agents in black tactical gear had arrived at the apartment complex in Van Nuys, their boots striking the concrete in perfect synchronization, their weapons visible and purposeful. The battering ram had splintered the door in a single impact. Douglas Hale had been dragged from his bed in boxer shorts and a terror-soaked t-shirt, his hands cuffed behind his back, his mouth open in a scream that had echoed through the hallway like something being torn from the earth. What the hell is this? He had shrieked, thrashing against the agents who had gripped his arms. The lead agent, a woman with grey at her temples and the exhausted authority of someone who had seen every variety of human cruelty, had held up a folder nearly 2 inches thick. Douglas Hale, you are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, interstate wire fraud, and aggravated assault spanning 8 years. We have documented evidence from your victim, testimony from 7 additional victims you attempted to extort, and complete financial records of stolen wages. Douglas had collapsed to his knees, his body folding like a puppet with its strings cut. He had been trembling like a cornered animal, like something hunted and finally caught, his face draining of color as the reality had struck him. Someone had given him up. Someone had kept records. Someone had made sure the federal government saw what he had done. The charges were 40 years. No parole. No possibility of redemption. Justice, Aleandro had learned long ago, did not require death. Death was too quick, too easy, too merciful for men like Douglas Hale. A 40-year federal sentence was a living burial, the slow crushing weight of time in a cell, the knowledge that he would age and fail and die inside concrete walls, utterly powerless, exactly as he had made Mia feel. At 9 in the morning of the same day, Margaret Harrington had been sitting in her office on the 18th floor of the Wilshire Grand Hotel when the knock had come at her door. 2 federal labor investigators, a man and a woman, had entered without waiting for permission. The woman had been in her 50s, with the bearing of someone who had investigated wage theft across 6 different states. Miss Harrington, we have evidence of systematic wage theft affecting 17 employees over 6 years, labor violations including forced overtime without compensation, and tax fraud related to unreported income. You are under arrest. Margaret's confidence had evaporated like water on hot stone. This is absurd. I run a respected hotel. Do you understand who I am? We know exactly who you are, the investigator had said. Margaret had been led through the lobby in handcuffs, her heels clicking against the marble floor, every guest and employee watching as the woman who had defined herself through her power and her cruelty had been reduced to a criminal in the sight of everyone who had ever feared her. Her photograph had been on every news channel that night, hotel manager arrested for wage theft and labor violations. The lawsuits had followed like a predator recognizing weakness. 17 former employees, supported by evidence that had somehow made its way to federal authorities, had sued simultaneously. The hotel had fired her within hours of her arrest. Assets had been frozen. The Harrington family name, once synonymous with Los Angeles society, had become synonymous with exploitation and public shame. In the poker room of the penthouse, surrounded by dark wood paneling and the smell of expensive cigars, Aleandro had watched the news with Vinny and Enzo. The television had shown Margaret being led from a federal courthouse, her face unrecognizable with fury and humiliation. The FBI doesn't move that fast without serious federal motivation, Vinny had said carefully, lighting a cigar and studying his boss's face. They don't coordinate simultaneous arrests without pressure from above. I made a phone call, Aleandro had said, his voice steady as concrete. Provided evidence. Encouraged urgency. Reminded certain people in positions of power that I remember their favors, and I collect my debts. Enzo had leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking beneath his weight. You burned federal favors on a nanny and a hotel manager. I burned them on justice, Aleandro had said, and his eyes had been the color of a winter sky, empty of mercy. There's a difference. A significant difference. But what Mia did not know, as she sat in her closet room 3 miles away, watching the news on her phone with trembling hands, was that Aleandro had been carrying her for months. Watching. Protecting. Building a future she had not yet learned to believe in. And now it was time for her to understand why. It was time for her to understand that after 8 years of being hunted, after 8 years of being owned, she had finally been claimed by someone whose power was absolute, whose love was written in the destruction of everyone who had ever hurt her. The rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear. The rain had stopped. The sky was beginning to clear. Mia stood in her new apartment in Silver Lake, sunlight pouring through real windows for the first time in 8 years. Not borrowed light. Not filtered through a converted closet door. Real windows that opened to a real street where real people walked without fear. She unpacked slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she removed each item from the cardboard box. A coffee mug. 3 books. A photograph in a wooden frame of her and Emma, taken at the social services office, both crying, both smiling, both finally breathing. And then, carefully wrapped in tissue paper, the child's first pink shoes. Lily's shoes. The shoes she had carried with her through the shelter, through the homeless shelter, through 3 different foster homes. The shoes she'd saved for 8 years the way other women save love letters. She placed them on the shelf above her bed, and for a long moment she simply stood there, looking at that small pink pair, understanding that she was finally home. The apartment was modest. 1 bedroom. Hardwood floors that creaked in the morning. A kitchen so small that standing at the sink meant touching the refrigerator. But the rent was $850 a month, and somehow she still didn't fully understand how it had been approved. Despite her credit score. Despite the eviction from 3 years ago. Despite everything. A lawyer named Stephen Chen, who worked for Aleandro, had simply handed her the keys and said, "This one's handled." She hadn't asked what that meant. Some part of her was learning not to ask too many questions about how her life kept improving in ways that defied logic. Within 2 weeks, Lily came for her first visit. The social services office was beige and fluorescent lit, filled with the smell of institutional coffee and broken hope. Mia sat in a plastic chair, her knee bouncing, her hands clasped so tightly her nails left marks in her palms. 11 years old now. She had only seen photographs. The court had allowed supervised visits only, and Margaret had made sure those visits were brief and cold. The caseworker opened the door. A girl walked in, tall and thin, with dark hair and eyes the color of wet earth. She wore a school uniform that was too big in the shoulders. When she saw Mia, she froze. "Lily?" Mia whispered. The girl's face crumpled. She ran. Not away, toward. She crashed into Mia's arms with the force of 11 years of longing, and both of them collapsed into tears so deep they seemed to come from the very foundation of their bones. "I'm never letting you go again," Mia whispered into her daughter's hair. "I swear it. Never again." Lily didn't speak. She just held on, trembling like a candle in the wind, and Mia understood that sometimes words were not enough. Sometimes you just had to hold a child and let her know through the language of your arms that she was safe, that she was home, that the running was finally over. 3 days later, Mia enrolled in night classes at community college, studying early childhood education. She sat in a classroom with 19 other students, most of them decades younger, all of them sitting in the harsh fluorescent light taking notes on childhood development, trauma-informed care, and how to build safe spaces for broken children. She didn't know that Aleandro had paid her tuition. $7,000, wired to the college under the name of a non-profit foundation that existed only to funnel his money into her future without her knowing. Stephen Chen had smiled when she'd asked about the financial aid letter. "Processing error in your favor," he'd said. "They happen sometimes." But it was no error. It was the hand of a man who had learned, somewhere in the depths of his ruthless education, that power meant nothing if it couldn't be used to protect the vulnerable. Meanwhile, at Emma's private school, the tuition situation had also resolved itself. A trust had been established, supposedly by a distant relative who had recently passed away. Margaret received the documentation with rage in her eyes, because she somehow knew, that this was not a relative. This was a threat wrapped in paperwork. This was a man telling her without words that he could reach into her life and change anything he wanted to change, and she had no power to stop him. Her lawyer had advised her to accept it. Some battles, he said, were not meant to be won. The small gestures of protection continued. Mia's 10-year-old car, which had been held together with determination and prayer, was replaced overnight with a modest Honda that had a full tank of gas and new tires. She found it in her apartment parking lot with keys in the ignition and no explanation. She'd called Stephen Chen. "Check your email," he'd said. The email was from her bank. A processing error had resulted in 3 years of overpayment on her student loans. The error had now been corrected. The remaining balance of $8,400 had been forgiven. She read the email 7 times, waiting for it to disappear, waiting for someone to call and say it was a mistake. No one called. 3 months after her graduation from community college, Aleandro appeared at her apartment door on a Thursday evening carrying Korean takeout. He wore a black wool coat over a charcoal suit, and his presence in her small Silver Lake apartment seemed to make the space shrink around him. He moved with the ease of a man accustomed to owning whatever room he entered. Mia opened the door, surprised. The two of them had barely spoken since the poker room, since the moment he'd watched her graduate from the back of the auditorium and then simply left. "Mr. Calabrese," she began. "Aleandro," he corrected, stepping inside without invitation, though she didn't close the door against him. "Please." They sat at her small kitchen table. Korean food in white containers. Water in mismatched glasses. The city lights of Silver Lake through the window behind him, casting him in silhouette and clarity at the same time. "Tell me about your classes," he said, opening a container of bibimbap. "They were good," Mia said carefully. "I'm working with children now. Part-time at a community center. 2 days a week while I figure out what comes next." "Emma asks about you," Aleandro said. 3 times a week. Lily has begun to trust again because of you. Do you understand what you've done?" Mia didn't answer. She understood that this was dangerous territory, this conversation happening between them in the quiet of her apartment, with the city humming outside the window. "You gave them a reason to believe that love doesn't leave," he continued. His voice was like stone sinking into water, solid, deep, irreversible. "That's a rare thing. Most people don't understand its value until they've lost it." When he left, his hand brushed hers as he stood. Both of them froze. His skin was warm, scarred across the knuckles. The hand of a man who had lived through violence. She didn't pull away. For a moment, they simply existed in that small contact, that brush of skin that meant everything and nothing. "Good night, Mia," he said. 3 months later, in the underground poker room surrounded by dark wood and the smell of expensive cigars, Aleandro sat at a high-stakes game and folded on a straight flush. $100,000 in chips pushed toward the center of the table, discarded without hesitation. Vinny, sitting to his left, set down his cards. "Boss, you folded on a straight flush." "My mind is elsewhere," Aleandro said. Enzo, who had watched this man for 15 years, who had seen him build an empire through violence and intelligence, exchanged a look with Vinny. That look said everything. They both knew where his mind was. They had seen it in his face for 6 months now, a distraction that was not weakness, but rather a realignment of priorities so fundamental it had changed the tilt of his entire world. "The nanny," Vinny said carefully. It was not quite a question. "She's not a nanny anymore," Aleandro said. His eyes were fixed on the window that overlooked the city. "She's becoming who she was always meant to be." "You're in love with her," Enzo said. "Not a question. A statement of fact." Aleandro's silence was confirmation. "She sees the man who saved her," he continued, his voice low. "Not me. Not who I actually am. And I'm not certain she would choose the truth if she knew it. But in 6 months, she would know it. And she would choose it anyway." 6 months after the arrests that had dismantled Douglas's empire and Margaret's social standing, Mia stood in her cap and gown at the community college auditorium, preparing to walk across the stage and receive her certificate in early childhood education. Lily sat beside her in the audience. Emma sat on her other side, wearing a blue dress and swinging her feet because she was still young enough to swing her feet and not feel self-conscious about it. As Mia's name was called and she stood to walk toward the stage, she scanned the audience out of habit, out of the deep conditioning of 8 years of fear. Aleandro stood in the back of the auditorium, alone, watching her with an intensity that made the air between them visible. Their eyes met. He nodded once, not in approval, but in recognition. In acknowledgement. In the understanding that she had done this without him, that her graduation was hers, not his gift. Then he turned and walked out of the auditorium. She stood on that stage, holding her certificate, and realized that she was finally ready to ask him the question that had been building in her chest for 6 months. Why? Why her? Why all of this? Why did a man like him care about a woman like her? 1 week after graduation, Mia appeared at the underground poker room unannounced. The guards didn't stop her. They had been told to let her through. She walked past the green felt tables, past the stacks of cash, past men in tailored suits who had learned not to ask questions, and found Aleandro in a private office lined with books that had never been read. He stood when she entered. "We need to talk," she said. He closed the door. Soundproofed. Sealed. The world outside disappeared. "Douglas is in federal prison for 40 years, she said. The words came fast, stacked like accusations. Margaret lost everything, her business, her reputation, her standing. My student loans vanished. My car is new. Emma's custody paperwork was processed in 3 weeks when it should have taken a year. My apartment lease was approved despite my credit score. I'm not stupid, Aleandro. This was all you." He didn't deny it. "Yes." "Why?" The word broke apart. "Why would you do all of this? Why would a man like you care about saving a woman like me?" Aleandro moved toward her slowly, carefully, as if approaching something frightened. "Because you saved Emma when you had no reason to help a stranger. Because you survived 8 years of hell and still poured love into a child who wasn't yours. Because you stood on that balcony in the rain and chose to live." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because I was that child once. Beaten. Broken. Told I was nothing. And I swore that no one would ever suffer like I did. Especially not you." He reached for her hand. His scarred hand. The hand that had signed orders, made decisions, moved men and money and power across a city like a general surveying a battlefield. "You've been carrying me," Mia whispered. "No," Aleandro said. "You carried yourself. I just made sure you didn't have to carry the weight of monsters anymore." She stepped forward and took his hand. She kissed him. Soft. Certain. Equal to equal. When she pulled back, tears ran down her face. After the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. He smiled. Real. Unguarded. "Is that a yes?" "To what?" Mia asked. "To letting me stand beside you. Not above you. Not below you. Beside you." Yes, she said. Yes. 1 year later, Mia's early childhood center in Silver Lake was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Bright walls painted with forest scenes. Educational toys organized by color. Photographs on the wall showing children learning, playing, healing. Aleandro appeared in the doorway at pickup time, wearing a gray suit and carrying 2 apple juice boxes. Emma ran to him. "Daddy!" He scooped her up, kissed her head, then set her down gently. Lily emerged from the reading corner, and he greeted her with the same tenderness. Then he met Mia's eyes across the room. She walked toward him, and they stood together, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice and survival and love earned through storms. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to remember that storms pass and miracles are real. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will change how you see the world. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever been saved by someone unexpected? We read every single one. Until tomorrow, remember, after the rain, the sky clears. And sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places.